1 Kings, chapter 1. King David was now a very old man, and though wrapped in bedclothes he could not keep warm. So his servant said to him, "Let us find a young girl for my lord the king, to wait on the king and look after him. She will lie close beside you, and this will keep my lord the king warm." Having searched for a beautiful girl throughout the territory of Israel, they found Abishag of Shunem and brought her to the king. The girl was very beautiful. She looked after the king and waited on him, but the king did not have intercourse with her. Now Adonijah son of Haggith was growing pretentious and saying, "I shall be king." Accordingly, he procured a chariot and team with 50 guards to run ahead of him. Never once in his life had his father crossed him by saying, "Why are you behaving like that?" He was very handsome too. His mother had given birth to him after Absalom. He conferred with Joab son of Zeruiah and with the priest Abiathar, who both rallied to Adonijah's cause. But neither Zadok the priest, nor Benaiah son of Jehoiada, nor the prophet Nathan, nor Shimei and Ray, nor David's champions, supported Adonijah. One day when Adonijah was sacrificing sheep, oxen and fattened calves at the sliding stone which is beside the fuller's spring, he invited all his brothers, the royal princes, and all the men of Judah in the king's service. But he did not invite the prophet Nathan, or Benaiah, or the champions, or his brother Solomon. Nathan then said to Bathsheba, Solomon's mother, "Have you not heard that, unknown to our lord David, Adonijah son of Haggith has become king? Well, this is my advice to you if you want to save your own life and the life of your son Solomon. Go straight into King David and say, 'My lord king, did you not make your servant this promise on oath? Your son Solomon is to be king after me. He is the one who is to sit on my throne? How is it, then, that Adonijah is king? And while you are still there talking to the king, I shall come in after you and confirm what you say.'" So Bathsheba went to the king in his room. He was very old, and Abishag of Shunem was in attendance on him. She knelt, prostrated herself before the king, and the king said, "What do you want?" "My lord," she replied, "you swore to your servant by Yahweh your God, 'Your son Solomon is to be king after me. He is the one who is to sit on my throne.' And now here is Adonijah king, and you, my lord king, knowing nothing about it. He has sacrificed quantities of oxen, fattened calves and sheep, and invited all the royal princes, the priest Abiathar, and Joab the army commander. But he has not invited your servant Solomon. Yet you are the man, my lord king, to whom all Israel looks, to tell them who is to succeed my lord the king. And when my lord the king falls asleep with his ancestors, Solomon and I shall be made to suffer for this." She was still speaking to the king when the prophet Nathan came in. The king was told, "The prophet Nathan is here." And he came into the king's presence and prostrated himself on his face before the king. "My lord king," said Nathan, "is this, then, your decree? Adonijah is to be king after me. He is the one who is to sit on my throne? For he has gone down today and sacrificed quantities of oxen, fattened calves and sheep, and invited all the royal princes, the army commanders, and the priest Abiathar. And they are there now, eating and drinking in his presence and shouting, 'Long live King Adonijah!' He has not, however, invited me your servant, Zadok the priest, Benaiah son of Jehoiada, or your servant Solomon. Can it be that this is done with my lord the king's approval, and that you have not told those loyal to you who is to succeed to the throne of my lord the king?" King David then spoke. "Call Bathsheba to me," he said. And she came into the king's presence and stood before him. Then the king swore this oath, "As Yahweh lives, who has delivered me from all adversity, just as I swore to you by Yahweh, God of Israel, that your son Solomon should be king after me and take my place on my throne, so I shall bring it about this very day." Bathsheba knelt down, prostrated herself on her face before the king, and said, "May my lord King David live forever." Then King David said, "Summon Zadok the priest, the prophet Nathan, and Benaiah son of Jehoiada." So they came into the king's presence. "Take the royal guard with you," said the king. "Mount my son Solomon on my own mule and escort him down to Gihon." There Zadok the priest and the prophet Nathan are to anoint him king of Israel. Then sound the trumpet and shout, Long live King Solomon! Then you are to escort him back, and he is then to assume my throne and be king in place of me. For he is the man whom I have appointed as ruler of Israel and of Judah. Benaiah son of Jehoiada answered the king. Amen, he said. And may Yahweh, God of my lord the king, confirm it. As Yahweh has been with my lord the king, so may he be with Solomon and make his throne even greater than the throne of my lord King David. Zadok the priest, the prophet Nathan, Benaiah son of Jehoiada, and the Cherethites and Pelethites then went down. They mounted Solomon on King David's mule and escorted him to Gihon. Zadok the priest took the horn of oil from the tent and anointed Solomon. They sounded the trumpet and all the people shouted, Long live King Solomon! The people all escorted him back, with pipes playing and loud rejoicing and shouts to split the earth. Adonijah and his guests, who had by then finished their meal, all heard the noise. Joab too heard the sound of the trumpet and said, What is that noise of uproar in the city? While he was still speaking, Jonathan son of Abiathar the priest arrived. Come in, Adonijah said. You are an honest man, so you must be bringing good news. The truth is, Jonathan answered, our lord King David has made Solomon king. With him, the king sent Zadok the priest, the prophet Nathan, Benaiah son of Jehoiada and the Cherethites and Pelethites. They mounted him on the king's mule, and Zadok the priest and the prophet Nathan have anointed him king at Gihon, and they have gone back again with shouts of joy, and the city is now in an uproar. That was the noise you heard. What is more, Solomon is seated on the royal throne. And further, the king's officers have been to congratulate our lord King David with the words, May your God make the name of Solomon more glorious than yours, and his throne more exalted than your own. And the king bowed down on his bed, and then said, Blessed be Yahweh, God of Israel, for setting one of my own sons on the throne while I am still alive to see it. At this, all Adonijah's guests, taking fright, got up and made off in their several directions. Adonijah, in terror of Solomon, got up and ran off to cling to the horns of the altar. Solomon was told, You should know that Adonijah is terrified of King Solomon and is now clinging to the horns of the altar, saying, Let King Solomon first swear to me that he will not have his servant executed. Should he bear himself honorably, Solomon answered, not one hair of his shall fall to the ground. But if he proves difficult, he shall die. King Solomon then sent for him to be brought down from the altar. He came and threw himself prostrate before King Solomon. Solomon said to him, Go to your house. First Kings, chapter 2. As David's life drew to its close, he laid this charge on his son Solomon. I am going the way of all the earth. Be strong and show yourself a man. Observe the injunctions of Yahweh your God, following his ways and keeping his laws, his commandments, his ordinances and his decrees, as stands written in the law of Moses, so that you may be successful in everything you do and undertake, and that Yahweh may fulfill the promise which he made me. If your sons are careful how they behave, and walk loyally before me with all their heart and soul, you will never want for a man on the throne of Israel. You know too what Joab son of Zeruiah did to me, and what he did to the two commanders of the army of Israel, Abner son of Ner and Amasa son of Jether, how he murdered them, shedding the blood of war in time of peace and staining the belt round my waist and the sandals on my feet with the blood of war. You will be wise not to let his gray head go down to Sheol in peace. As regards the sons of Barzillai of Gilead, treat them with faithful love. Let them be among those who eat at your table, for they were as kind to me when I was fleeing from your brother Absalom. You also have with you Shimei son of Gera, the Benjaminite from Bahurim. He called down a terrible curse on me the day I left for Mahanaim, but he came down to meet me at the Jordan, and I swore to him by Yahweh that I would not put him to death. But you must not let him go unpunished. You are a wise man and will know how to deal with him, to bring his gray head down to Sheol in blood. So David fell asleep with his ancestors and was buried in the city of David. David was king of Israel for a period of 40 years. He reigned at Hebron for 7 years, and in Jerusalem for 33. Solomon then sat on the throne of David, and his sovereignty was securely established. Adonijah son of Haggith went to Bathsheba mother of Solomon. "Do you bring peace?" she asked. He replied, "Yes, peace." Then he said, "I have something to say to you." "Say on," she replied. "You know," he said, "that the kingdom should have come to me, and that all Israel expected me to be king. But the crown eluded me and fell to my brother, since it came to him from Yahweh. Now I have one request to make you. Do not refuse me." "Go on," she said. He went on, "Please ask King Solomon, for he will not refuse you, to give me Abishag of Shunem in marriage." "Very well," Bathsheba replied, "I shall speak to the king about you." So Bathsheba went to King Solomon to speak to him about Adonijah. The king got up to meet her and bowed before her. He then sat down on his throne. A seat was brought for the king's mother, and she sat down on his right. She said, "I have one small request to make you. Do not refuse me." "Mother," the king replied, "make your request, for I shall not refuse you." "Let Abishag of Shunem," she said, "be given in marriage to your brother Adonijah." King Solomon replied to his mother, "And why do you request Abishag of Shunem for Adonijah? You might as well request the kingdom for him, since he is my elder brother, and Abiathar the priest and Joab son of Zeruiah are on his side." And King Solomon swore by Yahweh, "May God bring unnameable ills on me, and worse ills too," he said, "if Adonijah does not pay for these words of his with his life. As Yahweh lives, who has set me securely on the throne of my father David, and who, as he promised, has given him a dynasty, Adonijah shall be put to death this very day." And King Solomon commissioned Benaiah son of Jehoiada to strike him down, and that was how he died. As for Abiathar the priest, the king said to him, "Go to Anathoth to your estate. You deserve to die, but I am not going to put you to death now, since you carried the ark of Yahweh in the presence of my father David and shared all my father's hardships." Solomon deprived Abiathar of the priesthood of Yahweh, thus fulfilling the prophecy which Yahweh had uttered against the house of Eli at Shiloh. When the news reached Joab, for Joab had lent his support to Adonijah, though he had not supported Absalom, he fled to the tent of Yahweh and clung to the horns of the altar. King Solomon was told, "Joab has fled to the tent of Yahweh. He is there beside the altar." On this, Solomon sent word to Joab, "What reason did you have for fleeing to the altar?" Joab replied, "I was afraid of you and fled to Yahweh." Solomon then sent Benaiah son of Jehoiada. "Go," he said, "and strike him down." Accordingly Benaiah went to the tent of Yahweh. "By order of the king," he said, "come out." "No," he said, "I will die here." So Benaiah brought word back to the king. "This is what Joab said, and the answer he gave me." "Do as he says," the king replied. "Strike him down and bury him, and so rid me and my family today of the innocent blood which Joab has shed. Yahweh will bring his blood down on his own head, because he struck down 2 more upright and better men than he, and without my father David's knowledge, put to the sword Abner son of Ner, commander of the army of Israel, and Amasa son of Jether, commander of the army of Judah. May their blood come down on the head of Joab and his descendants forever. But may David, his descendants, his dynasty, his throne, have peace forever from Yahweh." Whereupon Benaiah son of Jehoiada went out, struck Joab down and put him to death. He was buried at his home in the desert. In his place as head of the army, the king appointed Benaiah son of Jehoiada and, in place of Abiathar, the priest Zadok. The king had Shimei summoned to him. "Build yourself a house in Jerusalem," he told him. "You are to live there. Do not leave it to go anywhere at all. The day you go out and cross the ravine of the Kidron, be sure you will certainly die. Your blood will be on your own head." "That is a fair demand," Shimei replied to the king. "Your servant will do as my lord the king orders." And for a long time Shimei lived in Jerusalem. But when 3 years had gone by, it happened that 2 of Shimei's slaves ran away to Achish son of Maacah, king of Gath. Shimei was told, "Your slaves are in Gath." On this, Shimei got up and saddled his donkey and went to Achish at Gath to find his slaves. He went off and brought his slaves back from Gath. Solomon was informed that Shimei had left Jerusalem for Gath and come back again. The king had Shimei summoned to him. "Did I not make you swear by Yahweh," he said, "and did I not warn you, the day you leave to go anywhere at all, be sure you will certainly die?" To which you replied, "That is a fair demand. Why did you not keep the oath to Yahweh and the order which I imposed on you?" The king then said to Shimei, "You know well all the evil you did to my father David. Yahweh is about to bring your wickedness down on your own head. But may King Solomon be blessed, and may the throne of David be kept secure before Yahweh forever." The king gave orders to Benaiah son of Jehoiada. He went out and struck Shimei down, and that was how he died. And now the kingdom was securely in Solomon's hands. 1 Kings, chapter 3. Solomon became the son-in-law of Pharaoh king of Egypt. He married Pharaoh's daughter, and took her to the city of David until he could complete the building of his palace, the temple of Yahweh and the ramparts of Jerusalem. The people, however, were still sacrificing on the high places, because at that time a dwelling place for the name of Yahweh had not yet been built. Solomon loved Yahweh. He followed the precepts of his father David, except that he offered sacrifice and incense on the high places. The king went to Gibeon to sacrifice there. Since that was the principal high place, Solomon presented 1,000 burnt offerings on that altar. At Gibeon Yahweh appeared to Solomon in a dream during the night. God said, "Ask what you would like me to give you." Solomon replied, "You showed most faithful love to your servant David, my father, when he lived his life before you in faithfulness and uprightness and integrity of heart. You have continued this most faithful love to him by allowing a son of his to sit on his throne today. Now, Yahweh my God, you have made your servant king in succession to David my father. But I am a very young man, unskilled in leadership. And here is your servant, surrounded with your people whom you have chosen, a people so numerous that its number cannot be counted or reckoned. So give your servant a heart to understand how to govern your people, how to discern between good and evil. For how could one otherwise govern such a great people as yours? It pleased Yahweh that Solomon should have asked for this. Since you have asked for this, God said, and not asked for long life for yourself or riches or the lives of your enemies, but have asked for a discerning judgment for yourself. Here and now I do what you ask. I give you a heart wise and shrewd as no one has had before, and no one will have after you. What you have not asked I shall give you too, such riches and glory as no other king can match. And I shall give you a long life, if you follow my ways, keeping my laws and commandments, as your father David followed them. Then Solomon woke up. It had been a dream. He returned to Jerusalem and stood before the ark of the covenant of Yahweh. He presented burnt offerings and communion sacrifices and held a banquet for all those in his service. Later 2 prostitutes came to the king and stood before him. "If it please you, my lord," one of the women said, "this woman and I live in the same house, and while she was in the house I gave birth to a child. Now it happened on the 3rd day after my delivery that this woman also gave birth to a child. We were alone together. There was no one else in the house with us, just the 2 of us in the house. Now one night this woman's son died. She overlaid him. And in the middle of the night she got up and took my son from beside me while your servant was asleep. She took him in her arms and put her own dead son in mine. When I got up to suckle my child, there he was, dead. But in the morning I looked at him carefully, and he was not the child I had borne at all." Then the other woman spoke. "That is not true. My son is the live one, yours is the dead one foot." And the first retorted, "That is not true. Your son is the dead one, mine is the live one." And so they wrangled before the king. This one says, the king observed, "My son is the one who is alive. Your son is dead," while the other says, "That is not true. Your son is the dead one, mine is the live one." "Bring me a sword," said the king. And a sword was brought into the king's presence. "Cut the living child in two," the king said, "and give half to one, half to the other." At this the woman who was the mother of the living child addressed the king, for she felt acutely for her son. "I beg you, my lord," she said, "let them give her the live child. On no account let them kill him." But the other said, "He shall belong to neither of us. Cut him in half." Then the king gave his decision. "Give the live child to the first woman," he said, "and do not kill him. She is his mother." All Israel came to hear of the judgment which the king had pronounced and held the king in awe, recognizing that he possessed divine wisdom for dispensing justice. 1 Kings, chapter 4. King Solomon was king of all Israel, and these were his high officials: Azariah son of Zadok, priest; Eliaph and Ahijah sons of Shisha, secretaries; Jehoshaphat son of Ahilud, herald; Benaiah son of Jehoiada, commander of the army; Zadok and Abiathar, priests; Azariah son of Nathan, chief administrator; Zabud son of Nathan, friend of the king; Ahishar, master of the palace; Eliab son of Joab, commander of the army; Aduram son of Abda, in charge of forced labor. Solomon had 12 administrators for all Israel who saw to the provisioning of the king and his household. Each had to provide for 1 month in the year. These are their names: son of Hur, in the mountain country of Ephraim; son of Deker, in Makaz; Shalbim, Beth-Shemesh, Aijalon, Beth-Hanan; son of Hezd, in Araboth. His district was Soko and the whole territory of Hepher; son of Abinadab, all the slopes of Dor. Tabath, Solomon's daughter, was his wife; Bana son of Ahilud, in Tanakh and Megiddo as far as the other side of Jokmeam, and all Beth-Shean below Jezreel, from Beth-Shean as far as Abel-Meholah by Zarathan; son of Jeber, in Ramoth-Gilead. His district was the encampments of Jair son of Manasseh, which are in Gilead. He had the region of Argob, which is in Bashan, 60 fortified towns, walled and with bolts of bronze; Ahinadab son of Iddo, in Mahanaim; Ahamaz in Naphtali. He too married a daughter of Solomon, Basemath; Bana son of Hushai, in Asher and in the highlands; Jehoshaphat son of Paruah, in Issachar; Shimi son of Elah, in Benjamin; Jeber son of Uri, in the territory of Gad, the territory of Sihon king of the Amorites and of Og king of Bashan. In addition, there was one administrator in the country. Judah and Israel were numerous as the sand on the seashore. They ate and drank and were happy. 1 Kings, chapter 5. Solomon was overlord of all the kingdoms from the river to the territory of the Philistines and the Egyptian border. They brought tribute and served him all his life long. The daily provisions for Solomon were 30 measures of fine flour and 60 measures of meal, 10 fattened oxen, 20 free grazing oxen, 100 sheep, besides deer and gazelles, roebucks and fattened poultry. For he was master of all Trans-Euphrates, of all the kings of Trans-Euphrates from Tifsa to Gaza, and he enjoyed peace on all his frontiers. Judah and Israel lived in security, everyone under his vine and his fig tree, from Dan to Beersheba, throughout the lifetime of Solomon. And Solomon had 4,000 stalls of horses for his chariots and 12,000 cavalrymen. These administrators provided the food for Solomon and for all those who were admitted by him to the royal table, each for the period of a month. They ensured that nothing was wanting. They also provided the barley and straw for the horses and draft animals. Where required, each according to the quota demanded of him. God gave Solomon immense wisdom and understanding, and a heart as vast as the sand on the seashore. The wisdom of Solomon surpassed the wisdom of all the sons of the east and all the wisdom of Egypt. He was wiser than anyone else, wiser than Ethan the Ezrahite, than the sons of Mahal, Heman, Calcol and Darda. His fame spread to all the surrounding nations. He composed 3,000 proverbs, and his songs numbered 1,005. He could discourse on plants from the cedar in Lebanon to the hyssop growing on the wall, and he could discourse on animals and birds and reptiles and fish. Men from all nations came to hear Solomon's wisdom, and he received gifts from all the kings in the world, who had heard of his wisdom. Hiram king of Tyre sent an embassy to Solomon, having learnt that he had been anointed king in succession to his father, and because Hiram had always been a friend of David. And Solomon sent this message to Hiram: "You are aware that my father David was unable to build a temple for the name of Yahweh his God, on account of the wars waged on him from every side, until Yahweh put his enemies under the soles of his feet. But now Yahweh my God has given me peace on every side. Not one enemy, no calamities. I propose, then, to build a temple for the name of Yahweh my God, in accordance with what Yahweh told my father David. Your son whom I shall place on your throne to succeed you will be the man to build a temple for my name. So now have cedars of Lebanon cut down for me. My servants will work with your servants, and I shall pay for the hire of your servants at whatever rate you fix. As you know, we have no one as skilled in felling trees as the Sidonians." When Hiram heard what Solomon had said, he was delighted. "Now blessed be Yahweh," he said, "who has given David a wise son to rule over this great people." And Hiram sent word to Solomon, "I have received your message. For my part, I shall supply you with all you require in the way of cedar wood and juniper. Your servants will bring these down from Lebanon to the sea, and I shall have them towed by sea to any place you name. I shall discharge them there, and you will take them over. For your part, you will see to the provisioning of my household as I desire." So Hiram provided Solomon with all the cedar wood and juniper he wanted, while Solomon gave Hiram 20,000 kor of wheat to feed his household, and 20,000 kor of pure oil. Solomon gave Hiram this every year. Yahweh gave Solomon wisdom as he had promised him. Good relations persisted between Solomon and Hiram, and the two of them concluded a treaty. King Solomon raised a levy throughout Israel for forced labor. The levy numbered 30,000 men. He sent these to Lebanon in relays, 10,000 a month. They spent 1 month in Lebanon and 2 months at home. A ram was in charge of the forced labor. Solomon also had 70,000 porters and 80,000 quarrymen in the mountains, as well as the administrators, officials who supervised the work, 3,300 of them in charge of the men employed in the work. At the king's orders they quarried huge stones, special stones for the laying of the temple foundations, dressed stones. Solomon's workmen and Hiram's workmen and the Gibeonites cut and assembled the wood and stone for the building of the temple. 1 Kings, chapter 6. In the 480th year after the Israelites came out of Egypt, in the 4th year of Solomon's reign over Israel, in the month of Ziv, which is the 2nd month, he began building the temple of Yahweh. The temple which King Solomon built for Yahweh was 60 cubits long, 20 cubits wide and 25 high. The portico in front of the hekel of the temple was 20 cubits long across the width of the temple and 10 cubits wide along the length of the temple. He made windows for the temple with frames and latticework. He also built an annex against the temple wall, right round the hekel and debir. He built lateral stories all round. The lowest lateral story was 5 cubits wide, the middle one 6 cubits, and the third 7 cubits, for he had made the outside of the temple wall correspondingly stepped back all round, so that the annex was not attached to the temple walls. The building of the temple was done with quarry, dressed stone. No sound of hammer or pick or any iron tool was to be heard in the temple while it was being built. The entrance to the lowest story was at the right-hand corner of the temple. Access to the middle story was by a spiral staircase, and so from the middle story to the third. Having finished building the temple, he roofed the temple with a coffered ceiling of cedar wood. Round the outside of the temple he then built the annex, which was 5 cubits high and was joined to the temple by cedar wood beams. And the word of Yahweh came to Solomon, with regard to this temple which you are now building, if you follow my statutes and obey my ordinances and faithfully follow my commandments, I shall fulfill the promise which I made about you to your father David. And I shall make my home among the Israelites and never forsake Israel my people. Solomon finished building the temple. He lined the inside of the temple walls with panels of cedar wood, paneling them on the inside from the floor of the temple to the beams of the ceiling, and laid the floor of the temple with juniper planks. The 20 cubits measured from the end of the temple he built of cedar planks from the floor to the beams, and this part was reserved as the debir, the Holy of Holies. The temple measured 40 cubits, the hekel, in front of the debir. There was cedar wood round the inside of the temple, ornamentally carved with gourds and rosettes. All was cedar wood, with no stone showing. In the inner part of the temple he designed a debir, to contain the Ark of the Covenant of Yahweh. The debir was 20 cubits long, 20 cubits wide, and 20 high, and he overlaid it on the inside with pure gold. He made an altar of cedar wood in front of the debir and overlaid it with gold. He overlaid the whole temple with gold, the whole temple entirely. In the debir he made 2 great winged creatures of wild olive wood. It was 10 cubits high. One winged creature's wing was 5 cubits long and the other wing 5 cubits. 10 cubits from wing tip to wing tip. The other winged creature also measured 10 cubits. Both had the same measurements and the same shape. The height of one was the same as the other's. He placed them in the middle of the inner chamber. Their wings were spread out so that the wing of one touched one of the walls and the wing of the other touched the other wall, while their wings met in the middle of the chamber wing to wing. And he overlaid them with gold. All round the temple walls he carved figures of winged creatures, palm trees and rosettes, both inside and outside. He overlaid the floor of the temple with gold, both inside and outside. He made the door of the debir with uprights of wild olive wood, and door jambs with 5 indented sections, and the 2 leaves of wild olive wood. He carved figures of great winged creatures, palm trees and rosettes which he overlaid with gold, and he gilded winged creatures and palm trees. Similarly, he made uprights of wild olive wood for the door of the hekel, and door jambs with 4 indented sections, and the 2 leaves of juniper. One leaf had 2 ribs binding it, and the other had 2 ribs binding it. He carved winged creatures, palm trees and rosettes, which he overlaid with gold laid evenly over the carvings. He built the wall of the inner court in 3 courses of dressed stone and 1 course of cedar beams. In the 4th year, in the month of Ziv, the foundations of the temple were laid. In the 11th year, in the month of Bul, that is, the 8th month, the temple was completed exactly as it had been planned and designed. Solomon took 7 years to build it. 1 Kings, chapter 7. As regards his palace, Solomon spent 13 years on it before the building was completed. He built the house of the forest of Lebanon, 100 cubits long, 50 cubits wide, and 30 cubits high, on 4 rows of cedar wood pillars, with lengths of cedar wood laid horizontally on the pillars. The upper part was paneled with cedar right down to the tie beams on 45 pillars, 15 in each row. There were 3 rows of window frames, with the windows corresponding to one another at 3 levels. All the doorways and windows were rectangular, with the windows corresponding to one another at 3 levels. He also made the colonnade, 50 cubits long and 30 cubits broad, with a cornice in front. He also made the hall of the throne where he used to dispense justice, that is, the hall of justice. It was paneled in cedar from floor to beams. His own living quarters, in the other court and inwards from the hall, were of the same construction. And there was a house similar to this hall for Pharaoh's daughter whom he had taken in marriage. All these buildings were of special stones cut to measure, trimmed on the inner and outer sides with a saw. From the foundations to the coping, the foundations were of special stones, huge stones, of 10 and 8 cubits, and above these, special stones, cut to measure, and cedar wood, and on the outside, The great court had 3 courses of dressed stone round it and 1 course of cedar beams. So also had the inner court of the temple of Yahweh and the vestibule of the temple. King Solomon sent for Hiram of Tyre. He was the son of a widow of the tribe of Naphtali, but his father had been a Tyrian, a bronze worker. He was a highly intelligent craftsman, skilled in all types of bronze work. He came to King Solomon and did all this work for him. He cast the 2 bronze pillars. The height of one pillar was 18 cubits, and a cord 12 cubits long gave the measurement of its girth. So also was the second pillar. He made 2 capitals of cast bronze for the tops of the pillars. The height of one capital was 5 cubits, and the height of the other 5 cubits. He made 2 sets of filigree to cover the molding of the 2 capitals surmounting the pillars, 1 filigree for one capital and 1 filigree for the other. He also made pomegranates, 2 rows of them round each filigree, 400 in all. The capitals surrounding the pillars were lily-shaped, applied on the raised molding behind the filigree. There were 200 pomegranates round one capital and the same round the other capital. He erected the pillars in front of the portico of the temple. He erected the right-hand pillar and named it Jachin. He erected the left-hand pillar and named it Boaz. Thus, the work on the pillars was completed. He made the sea of cast metal, 10 cubits from rim to rim, circular in shape and 5 cubits high. A cord 30 cubits long gave the measurement of its girth. Under its rim and completely encircling it were gourds surrounding the sea. Over a length of 30 cubits the gourds were in 2 rows, of one and the same casting with the rest. It rested on 12 oxen, 3 facing north, 3 facing west, 3 facing south, 3 facing east. On these, their hindquarters all turned inwards, stood the sea. It was a hand's breadth in thickness, and its rim was shaped like the rim of a cup, lily-shaped. It could hold 2,000 measures. He made the 10 bronze stands. Each stand was 4 cubits long, 4 cubits wide, and 3 high. They were designed as follows. They had an undercarriage and crosspieces to the undercarriage. On the crosspieces of the undercarriage were lions and bulls and winged creatures, and on top of the undercarriage was a support. Under the lions and oxen there were scrolls in the style of. Each stand had 4 bronze wheels with bronze axles. Its 4 feet had shoulderings under the basin, and the shoulderings were cast. Its mouth measured 1.5 cubits from where the shoulderings met to the top. Its mouth was round like a stand for a vessel, and on the mouth there were engravings too. The crosspieces, however, were rectangular and not round. The 4 wheels were under the crosspieces. The axles of the wheels were inside the stands. The height of the wheels was 1.5 cubits. The wheels were designed like chariot wheels. Their axles, felloes, spokes and naves had all been cast. There were 4 shoulderings at the 4 corners of each stand. The stand and the shoulderings were all of a piece. At the top of the stand there was a support, circular in shape and 1/2 cubit high, and on top of the stand there were lugs. The crosspieces were of a piece with the stand. On the bands he engraved winged creatures and lions and palm leaves, and scrolls right round. He made the 10 stands like this, the same casting and the same measurements for all. He made 10 bronze basins. Each basin held 40 measures, and each basin measured 4 cubits, 1 basin to each of the 10 stands. He arranged the stands, 5 on the right-hand side of the temple, 5 on the left-hand side of the temple. The sea he placed on the right-hand side of the temple, to the southeast. Hiram made the ash containers, the scoops and the sprinkling bowls. He finished all the work that he did for King Solomon on the temple of Yahweh, 2 pillars, the 2 moldings of the capital surrounding the pillars, the 2 sets of filigree to cover the 2 moldings of the capital surmounting the pillars, the 400 pomegranates for the 2 sets of filigree, 2 rows of pomegranates for each set of filigree, the 10 stands and the 10 basins on the stands, the 1 sea and the 12 oxen beneath the sea, the ash containers, the scoops and sprinkling bowls. All these objects made by Hiram for King Solomon for the temple of Yahweh were of burnished bronze. He made them by the process of sand casting, in the plain of the Jordan between Succos and Zarethan. There were so many of them, that the weight of the bronze was never calculated. Solomon made all the objects designed for the temple of Yahweh, the golden altar and the gold table for the loaves of permanent offering, the lampstands, 5 on the right and 5 on the left in front of the debir, of pure gold, the floral work, the lamps, the tongs of gold, the basins, the snuffers, the sprinkling bowls, the incense ladles and the pans of real gold, the door panels, for the inner shrine, that is, the Holy of Holies, and for the hekel of gold. Thus all the work done by King Solomon for the temple of Yahweh was completed, and Solomon brought in the gifts which his father David had consecrated. And he had the silver, the gold and the utensils put into the treasuries of the temple of Yahweh. 1 Kings, chapter 8. Solomon then summoned the elders of Israel to Jerusalem to bring the ark of the covenant of Yahweh up from the city of David, that is, Zion. All the men of Israel assembled round King Solomon in the month of Ethanim, at the time of the feast, that is, the 7th month. When all the elders of Israel had arrived, the priests took up the ark and the tent of meeting and all the sacred utensils which were in the tent. King Solomon and all Israel, present with him before the ark, sacrificed countless, innumerable sheep and oxen. The priests brought the ark of the covenant of Yahweh to its place, in the debir of the temple, that is, in the Holy of Holies, under the wings of the winged creatures, for the winged creatures spread their wings over the place where the ark stood, forming a canopy over the ark and its shafts. These were so long, however, that the ends of the shafts could be seen from the holy place in front of the debir, though they could not be seen from outside. They are still there today. There was nothing in the ark except the 2 stone tablets which Moses had placed in it at Horeb, the tablets of the covenant which Yahweh made with the Israelites when they came out of Egypt. Now when the priests came out of the holy place, the cloud filled the temple of Yahweh, and because of the cloud the priests could not stay and perform their duties, for the glory of Yahweh filled the temple of Yahweh. Then Solomon said, Yahweh has chosen to dwell in thick cloud. I have built you a princely dwelling, a residence for you forever. The king then turned round and blessed the whole assembly of Israel. While the whole assembly of Israel stood, he said, Blessed be Yahweh, God of Israel, who has carried out by his hand what he promised with his mouth to my father David, when he said, From the day I brought my people Israel out of Egypt I chose no city, in any of the tribes of Israel, to have a temple built where my name should be, but I did choose David to rule my people Israel. My father David had set his heart on building a temple for the name of Yahweh, God of Israel. But Yahweh said to my father David, You have set your heart on building a temple for my name, and in this you have done well. And yet, you are not the man to build the temple, but your son, yet to be born to you, will be the one to build the temple for my name. Yahweh has kept the promise which he made. I have succeeded my father David and am seated on the throne of Israel, as Yahweh promised. I have built the temple for the name of Yahweh, God of Israel, and in it I have made a place for the ark containing the covenant of Yahweh which he made with our ancestors when he brought them out of Egypt. Then, in the presence of the whole assembly of Israel, Solomon stood facing the altar of Yahweh and, stretching out his hands towards heaven, said, Yahweh, God of Israel, there is no God like you in heaven above or on earth beneath, as loyal to the covenant and faithful in love to your servants as long as they walk wholeheartedly in your way. You have kept the promise you made to your servant, my father David, as you promised him you would. Today you have carried it out by your power. And now, Yahweh, God of Israel, keep the promise which you made to your servant David when you said, You will never lack for a man to sit before me on the throne of Israel, provided that your sons are careful how they behave, walking before me as you yourself have done. So now, God of Israel, let the words come true which you spoke to your servant, my father David. Yet will God really live with human beings on earth? Why, the heavens, the highest of the heavens, cannot contain you. How much less this temple built by me? Even so, listen favorably to the prayer and entreaty of your servant, Yahweh my God. Listen to the cry and to the prayer which your servant makes to you today. Day and night may your eyes watch over this temple, over this place of which you have said, My name will be there. Listen to the prayer which your servant offers in this place. Listen to the entreaty of your servant and of your people Israel. Whenever they pray in this place, listen from the place where you reside in heaven, and when you hear, forgive. If someone has wronged his neighbor and a curse is laid on him to make him swear an oath here before your altar in this temple, then listen from the place where you reside in heaven and do justice between your servants, condemning the guilty one by making him suffer for his conduct, and acquitting the upright by rewarding him as his uprightness deserves. When your people Israel are defeated by the enemy because they have sinned against you, but then return to you and acknowledge your name, and pray and seek your favors in this temple, then listen from the place where you reside in heaven. Forgive the sin of your people Israel, and bring them back to the country which you gave to their ancestors. When the heavens are shut and there is no rain because they have sinned against you, if they pray in this place and praise your name and, having been humbled by you, desist from their sin, then listen from the place where you reside in heaven and forgive the sin of your servant and your people Israel. For you are constantly showing them the good way which they must follow, and send rain on your country, which you have given to your people as their heritage. Should there be famine in the country, or pestilence, wind blast or mildew, locust or caterpillar, should their enemy lay siege to one of their gates, should there be any plague or any disease, whatever be the prayer or entreaty of any individual aware of a particular affliction, when that person stretches out the hands towards this temple, then listen from heaven where you reside. Forgive and, since you know what is in the heart, deal with each as their conduct deserves. For you alone know what is in every human heart, so that they may reverence you throughout their lives in the country which you gave to our ancestors. Even the foreigner, not belonging to your people Israel but coming from a distant country, attracted by your name, for they too will hear of your name, of your mighty hand and outstretched arm. If a foreigner comes and prays in this temple, listen from heaven where you reside, and grant all that the foreigner asks of you, so that all the peoples of the earth may acknowledge your name and, like your people Israel, revere you and know that this temple, which I have built, bears your name. If your people go out to war against the enemy, on whatever missions you send them, and they pray to Yahweh, turning towards the city which you have chosen and towards the temple which I have built for your name, then listen from heaven to their prayer and their entreaty, and uphold their cause. When they sin against you, for there is no one who does not sin, and you are angry with them and abandon them to the enemy, and their captors carry them off to a hostile country, be it far away or near, if they come to their senses in the country to which they have been taken as captives and repent and entreat you in the country of their captors, saying, We have sinned, we have acted perversely and wickedly, and turn back to you with all their heart and soul in the country of the enemies, who have taken them captive, and pray to you, turning towards the country which you gave to their ancestors, towards the city which you have chosen and towards the temple which I have built for your name, listen to their prayer and their entreaty from the place where you reside in heaven, uphold their case, forgive your people for having sinned against you and for all the crimes against you of which they have been guilty, and allow them to arouse the pity of their captors so that these may have pity on them. For they are your people and your heritage whom you brought out of Egypt, that iron foundry. May your eyes be open to the entreaty of your servant and the entreaty of your people Israel, to listen to them, whatever they ask of you. For you it was who set them apart from all the peoples of the earth to be your heritage, as you declared through your servant Moses when you brought our ancestors out of Egypt, Lord Yahweh. When Solomon had finished offering to Yahweh this whole prayer and entreaty, he rose from where he was kneeling with hands stretched out towards heaven before the altar of Yahweh, and stood upright. And in a loud voice he blessed the whole assembly of Israel. Blessed be Yahweh, he said, who has granted rest to his people Israel, keeping all his promises. Of all the promises of good that he made through his servant Moses, not one has failed. May Yahweh our God be with us, as he was with our ancestors. May he never desert us or cast us off. May he turn our hearts towards him so that we may follow all his ways and keep the commandments and laws and ordinances which he gave to our ancestors. May these words of mine, of my entreaty before Yahweh, be present with Yahweh our God day and night, that he may uphold the cause of his servant and the cause of Israel his people, as each day requires, so that all the peoples of the earth may come to know that Yahweh is God indeed and that there is no other. May your hearts be holy with Yahweh our God, following his laws and keeping his commandments as at this present day. The king and all Israel with him offered sacrifice before Yahweh. Solomon offered a communion sacrifice of 22,000 oxen and 120,000 sheep to Yahweh, and thus the king and all the Israelites dedicated the temple of Yahweh. On the same day the king consecrated the middle part of the court in front of the temple of Yahweh, for that was where he presented the burnt offerings, oblations and fatty parts of the communion sacrifices, since the bronze altar which stood before Yahweh was too small to hold the burnt offering, oblation and the fatty parts of the communion sacrifice. And then Solomon and with him all Israel from the pass of Hamath to the torrent of Egypt, a great assembly, celebrated the feast before Yahweh our God for 7 days. On the 8th day he dismissed the people, who bade farewell to the king and went home joyful and happy of heart over all the goodness which Yahweh had shown to his servant and his people Israel. 1 Kings, chapter 9. When Solomon had finished building the temple of Yahweh, the royal palace and everything else which Solomon had wanted to do, Yahweh appeared to Solomon a second time, as he had appeared to him at Gibeon. Yahweh said to him, I have heard your prayer and the entreaty which you have before me. I consecrate this temple which you have built. I place my name there forever. My eyes and my heart will be there always. For your part, if you walk before me in innocence of heart and in honesty, like your father David, if you do everything that I command and keep my laws and my ordinances, I shall make your royal throne secure over Israel forever, as I promised your father David when I said, You will never lack for a man on the throne of Israel. But if you turn away from me, either you or your descendants, and instead of keeping my commandments and laws which I have laid down for you, you go and serve other gods and worship them, then I shall banish Israel from the country which I have given them, and shall disown this temple which I have consecrated for my name, and Israel will be a proverb and a byword among all peoples. As for this once exalted temple, everyone who passes by will be appalled, and they will whistle and say, Why has Yahweh treated this country and this temple like this? And the answer will be, Because they deserted Yahweh their God who brought their ancestors out of Egypt, and they adopted other gods and worshipped and served them. That is why Yahweh has brought all these disasters on them. At the end of the 20 years that it took Solomon to erect the 2 buildings, the temple of Yahweh and the royal palace, Hiram king of Tyre had provided Solomon with all the cedar wood, juniper wood and gold that he wanted. King Solomon gave Hiram 20 towns in the territory of Galilee. But when Hiram came from Tyre to view the towns that Solomon had given him, he was not pleased with them. He said, What kind of towns are these you have given me, brother? And to this day they are known as Cabul land. Hiram sent the king 120 talents of gold. This is an account of the forced labor levied by King Solomon for building the temple of Yahweh, his own palace, the Millo and the fortifications of Jerusalem, Hazor, Megiddo, Gezer. Pharaoh king of Egypt mounted an expedition, captured Gezer, burnt it down and massacred the Canaanites living there. He then gave the town as a dowry to his daughter, Solomon's wife, and Solomon rebuilt Gezer, Lower Beth-horon, Baalath, Tamar in the desert, inside the country, all Solomon's storage towns owned by Solomon, all the towns for his chariots and horses, and whatever Solomon was pleased to build in Jerusalem, in the Lebanon and in all the countries under his rule. All those who survived the Amorite, Hittite, Perizzite, Hivite and Jebusite peoples, who were not Israelites, their descendants still remaining in the country on whom the Israelites had not been able to enforce the curse of destruction, these Solomon levied as forced laborers, as is still the case today. Solomon did not, however, impose forced labor on the Israelites, for they were soldiers, his officials, his administrators, his officers and his chariot and cavalry commanders. There were 550 officials in charge of the foreman over Solomon's work, who supervised the people employed on the work. After Pharaoh's daughter had moved from the city of David up to the palace which he had built for her, he then built the Millo. 3 times a year Solomon presented burnt offerings and communion sacrifices on the altar which he had built for Yahweh and set his burnt offerings smoking before Yahweh. Thus he completed the temple. King Solomon equipped a fleet at Ezion-Geber, which is near Elath on the shores of the Red Sea, in Edom. For this fleet Hiram sent men of his, experienced sailors, to serve with those in Solomon's service. They went to Ophir and took on 420 talents of gold, which they brought back to Solomon. 1 Kings, chapter 10. The queen of Sheba heard of Solomon's fame and came to test him with difficult questions. She arrived in Jerusalem with a very large retinue, with camels laden with spices and an immense quantity of gold and precious stones. Having reached Solomon, she discussed with him everything that she had in mind, and Solomon had an answer for all her questions. Not one of them was too obscure for the king to answer for her. When the queen of Sheba saw how very wise Solomon was, the palace which he had built, the food at his table, the accommodation for his officials, the organization of his staff and the way they were dressed, his cupbearers, and the burnt offerings which he presented in the temple of Yahweh, it left her breathless, and she said to the king, "The report I heard in my own country about your wisdom in handling your affairs was true then. Until I came and saw for myself, I did not believe the reports, but clearly I was told less than half. For wisdom and prosperity, you surpass what was reported to me. How fortunate your wives are! How fortunate these courtiers of yours, continually in attendance on you and listening to your wisdom. Blessed be Yahweh your God, who has shown you his favor by setting you on the throne of Israel. Because of Yahweh's everlasting love for Israel, he has made you king to administer law and justice." And she presented the king with 120 talents of gold and great quantities of spices and precious stones. No such wealth of spices ever came again as those which the queen of Sheba gave to King Solomon. Similarly, Hiram's fleet, which brought the gold from Ophir, also brought back great cargoes of almug timber and precious stones. Of the almug timber the king made supports for the temple of Yahweh and for the royal palace, and harps and lyres for the musicians. No more of this almug timber has since come or been seen to this day. And King Solomon, in his turn, presented the queen of Sheba with everything that she expressed a wish for, besides those presents which he gave her with a munificence worthy of King Solomon. After which, she went home to her own country, she and her servants. The weight of gold received annually by Solomon amounted to 666 talents of gold, besides what tolls and foreign trade, as well as everything the Arab kings and the provincial governors brought in. King Solomon made 200 great shields of beaten gold, 600 shekels of gold going into one shield. Also 300 small shields of beaten gold, 3 mina of gold going into one shield. And the king put these into the house of the forest of Lebanon. The king also made a great ivory throne which he overlaid with refined gold. The throne had 6 steps, a back with a rounded top, and arms on each side of the seat. 2 lions stood beside the arms, and 12 lions stood on each side of the 6 steps. Nothing like it has ever been made in any other kingdom. All King Solomon's drinking vessels were of gold, and all the plate in the house of the forest of Lebanon was of pure gold. Silver was little thought of in Solomon's days, since the king had a fleet of Tarshish at sea with Hiram's fleet, and once every 3 years the fleet of Tarshish would come back laden with gold and silver, ivory, apes, and baboons. For riches and for wisdom, King Solomon surpassed all kings on earth, and the whole world consulted Solomon to hear the wisdom which God had implanted in his heart, and everyone would bring a present with him. Things made of silver, things made of gold, robes, armor, spices, horses and mules, and this went on year after year. Solomon then built up a force of chariots and cavalry. He had 1,400 chariots and 12,000 horses. These he stationed in the chariot towns and near the king in Jerusalem. In Jerusalem the king made silver as common as stones, and cedar wood as plentiful as sycamore in the lowlands. Solomon's horses were imported from Musur and Cilicia. The king's dealers acquired them from Cilicia at the prevailing price. A chariot was imported from Egypt for 600 silver shekels, and a horse from Cilicia for 150. They also supplied the Hittite and Aramean kings, who all used them as middlemen. 1 Kings, chapter 11. King Solomon loved many foreign women, not only Pharaoh's daughter but Moabites, Edomites, Sidonians and Hittites, from those peoples of whom Yahweh had said to the Israelites, "You are not to go among them nor they among you, or they will be sure to sway your hearts to their own gods." But Solomon was deeply attached to them. He had 700 wives of royal rank and 300 concubines. When Solomon grew old, his wives swayed his heart to other gods, and his heart was not wholly with Yahweh his God as his father David's had been. Solomon became a follower of Astarte, the goddess of the Sidonians, and of Milcom, the Ammonite abomination. He did what was displeasing to Yahweh, and was not a wholehearted follower of Yahweh, as his father David had been. Then it was that Solomon built a high place for Chemosh, the abomination of Moab, on the mountain to the east of Jerusalem, and to Milcom, the abomination of the Ammonites. He did the same for all his foreign wives, who offered incense and sacrifice to their gods. Yahweh was angry with Solomon because his heart had turned away from Yahweh, God of Israel, who had twice appeared to him and had forbidden him to follow other gods. But he did not carry out Yahweh's order. Yahweh therefore said to Solomon, "Since you have behaved like this and have not kept my covenant or the laws which I laid down for you, I shall tear the kingdom away from you and give it to one of your servants. For your father David's sake, however, I shall not do this during your lifetime, but shall tear it out of your son's hands. Even so, I shall not tear the whole kingdom from him. For the sake of my servant David, and for the sake of Jerusalem which I have chosen, I shall leave your son one tribe." Yahweh raised an enemy against Solomon, Hadad the Edomite, of the kingly stock of Edom. After David had crushed Edom, Joab the army commander had gone to bury the dead and had slaughtered the entire male population of Edom. Joab stayed there with all Israel for 6 months until he had exterminated the entire male population of Edom. But Hadad, with a number of Edomites in his father's service, had fled to Egypt. Hadad had been only a boy at the time. They set out from Midian, and on reaching Paran, took a number of men from Paran with them and went on to Egypt, to Pharaoh the king of Egypt, who provided him with a house, undertook to maintain him, and assigned him an estate. Hadad became a great favorite of Pharaoh, who gave him his own wife's sister in marriage, the sister of the great lady Tahpenes. The sister of Tahpenes bore him his son Genubath, whom Tahpenes brought up in Pharaoh's palace. Genubath living in Pharaoh's palace with Pharaoh's own children. But when news reached Hadad in Egypt that David had fallen asleep with his ancestors and that Joab the army commander was dead, he said to Pharaoh, "Give me leave to go that I may return to my own country." "What do you lack here with me," Pharaoh said, "for you to want to go back to your country?" "Nothing," he replied, "but please let me go." Hence the harm which Hadad caused. He loathed Israel and ruled Edom. God raised a second enemy against Solomon, Rezon son of Eliada. He had fled from his master, Hadadezer king of Zobah. A number of men having rallied to him, he became leader of a marauding band, which was then massacred by David. Rezon captured Damascus and settled there and became king of Damascus. He was hostile to Israel as long as Solomon lived. Jeroboam was the son of Nebat, an Ephraimite from Zerida. The name of his mother, a widow, was Zeruiah. He was in Solomon's service but revolted against the king. This is the account of his revolt. Solomon was building the Millo and closing the breach in the city of David his father. Now this Jeroboam was a man of great energy. Solomon, noticing how the young man set about his work, put him in charge of all the forced labor of the house of Joseph. One day when Jeroboam had gone out of Jerusalem, the prophet Ahijah of Shiloh accosted him on the road. Ahijah was wearing a new cloak. The two of them were in the open country by themselves. Ahijah took the new cloak which he was wearing and tore it into 12 strips, saying to Jeroboam, "Take 10 strips for yourself, for Yahweh, God of Israel, says this, I am going to tear the kingdom from Solomon's hand and give 10 tribes to you. He will keep 1 tribe for the sake of my servant David and for the sake of Jerusalem, the city which I have chosen out of all the tribes of Israel. For he has forsaken me to worship Astarte the goddess of the Sidonians, Chemosh the god of Moab, Milcom the god of the Ammonites. He has not followed my ways by doing what I regard as right, or by keeping my laws and ordinances as his father David did. But it is not from his hands that I will take the kingdom, since I have made him a prince for as long as he lives, for the sake of my servant David who kept my commandments and laws. I shall, however, take the kingdom from the hand of his son, and I shall give it to you, that is, the 10 tribes. I shall give 1 tribe to his son, so that my servant David may always have a lamp in my presence in Jerusalem, the city which I have chosen as a dwelling place for my name. You nonetheless I shall appoint to rule over as much as you wish, and you will be king of Israel. If you listen to all my orders and follow my ways, by doing what I regard as right and by keeping my laws and commandments as my servant David did, then I shall be with you and shall build you as enduring a dynasty as the one which I built for David. I shall give Israel to you, and I shall humble the descendants of David, but not forever. Solomon tried to kill Jeroboam, but he made off and fled to Egypt, to Shishak king of Egypt, and he remained in Egypt until Solomon's death. The rest of the history of Solomon, his entire career, his wisdom, is this not recorded in the book of the Annals of Solomon? Solomon's reign in Jerusalem over all Israel lasted 40 years. When Solomon fell asleep with his ancestors, he was buried in the city of David his father. His son Rehoboam succeeded him. 1 Kings, chapter 12. Rehoboam then went to Shechem, all Israel having come to Shechem to proclaim him king. As soon as Jeroboam son of Nebat heard the news, he was still in Egypt, where he had taken refuge from King Solomon. He returned from Egypt. They now sent for him, and Jeroboam and the whole assembly of Israel came. And they spoke as follows to Rehoboam: Your father laid a cruel yoke on us. If you will lighten your father's cruel slavery, that heavy yoke which he imposed on us, we are willing to serve you. He said to them, Go away for 3 days and then come back to me. And the people went away. King Rehoboam then consulted the elders who had been in attendance on his father Solomon while he was alive, and said, How do you advise me to answer this people? They replied, If you become the servant of this people today, and submit to them and give them a fair reply, then they will remain your servants forever. But he rejected the advice given him by the elders and consulted the young men in attendance on him, who had grown up with him. He said, How do you advise us to answer these people who have been saying, Lighten the yoke which your father imposed on us? The young men who had grown up with him replied, This is the way to answer these people who have been saying, Your father made our yoke heavy. You must lighten it for us. This is the right thing to say to them. My little finger is thicker than my father's loins. Although my father laid a heavy yoke on you, I shall make it heavier still. My father controlled you with a whip, but I shall apply a spiked lash. On the 3rd day Jeroboam and all the people came to Rehoboam in obedience to the king's instruction. Come back to me in 3 days' time. And the king gave the people a harsh answer, rejecting the advice given him by the elders and speaking to them as the young men had recommended. My father made your yoke heavy. I shall make it heavier still. My father controlled you with a whip, but I shall apply a spiked lash. Thus the king refused to listen to the people, and this was brought about by Yahweh to fulfill the promise which he had made through Ahijah of Shiloh to Jeroboam son of Nebat. When all Israel saw that the king refused to listen to them, the people answered the king thus, What share have we in David? No heritage in the son of Jesse. Away to your tents, Israel. Now look after your own house, David. So Israel went home again. Rehoboam, however, reigned over those Israelites who lived in the towns of Judah. When King Rehoboam sent a ram, who was in charge of forced labor, all Israel stoned him to death, while King Rehoboam managed to mount his chariot and escape to Jerusalem. And Israel has remained in rebellion against the house of David from that day to this. When all Israel heard that Jeroboam had returned, they summoned him to the assembly and made him king of all Israel. No one remained loyal to the house of David, except the tribe of Judah. When Rehoboam reached Jerusalem, he mustered the whole house of Judah and the tribe of Benjamin, 180,000 picked warriors, to fight the house of Israel and win back the kingdom for Rehoboam son of Solomon. But the word of Yahweh came to Shemaiah, man of God, say this to Rehoboam son of Solomon, king of Judah, to the whole house of Judah, to Benjamin and to the rest of the people. Yahweh says this, do not go and make war on your brothers, the Israelites. Let everyone go home, for this is my doing. They obeyed the command of Yahweh and turned back in accordance with his word. Jeroboam fortified Shechem in the mountain country of Ephraim and made that his residence. Then, leaving there, he fortified Penuel. Jeroboam thought to himself, as things are, the kingdom will revert to the house of David. If this people continues to go up to the temple of Yahweh in Jerusalem to offer sacrifices, the people's heart will turn back again to their Lord, Rehoboam king of Judah, and they will put me to death. So the king thought this over and then made 2 golden calves. He said to the people, you have been going up to Jerusalem long enough. Here is your God, Israel, who brought you out of Egypt. He set one up at Bethel, and the people went in procession in front of the other one all the way to Dan. In Israel this gave rise to sin, for the people went to Bethel to worship the one, and all the way to Dan to worship the other. He set up shrines on the high places and appointed priests from ordinary families, who were not of Levitical descent. Jeroboam also instituted a feast in the 8th month, on the 15th of the month, like the feast kept in Judah, when he offered sacrifices on the altar. This he did at Bethel, offering sacrifices to the calves which he had made, and, at Bethel, installing the priests of the high places which he had set up. On the 15th of the 8th month, the month which he had chosen deliberately, he offered sacrifices on the altar which he had made at Bethel. He instituted a feast for the Israelites and himself went up to the altar to burn the sacrifice. 1 Kings, chapter 13. There came to Bethel at Yahweh's command a man of God from Judah, just as Jeroboam was standing by the altar to offer the sacrifice. And at Yahweh's command this man denounced the altar. Altar, altar, he said, Yahweh says this, a son is to be born to the house of David, Josiah by name, and on you he will slaughter the priests of the high places who have offered sacrifice on you, and on you he will burn human bones. At the same time he gave a sign. This is the sign, he said, that Yahweh has spoken. This altar will burst apart and the ashes which are on it will be spilt. When the king heard how the man of God denounced the altar of Bethel, he stretched out his hand from the altar, saying, seize him. But the hand he stretched out against the man withered, and he could not draw it back. And the altar burst apart and the ashes from the altar were spilt, in accordance with the sign given by the man of God at Yahweh's command. The king said to the man of God, I beg you to placate Yahweh your God, and so restore me the use of my hand. The man of God placated Yahweh. The king's hand was restored as it had been before. The king then said to the man of God, come home with me and refresh yourself, and I shall give you a present. But the man of God replied to the king, were you to give me half your palace, I would not go with you. I will eat and drink nothing here, for I have had Yahweh's order. You are to eat or drink nothing, nor to return by the way you came. And he left by another road and did not return by the way he had come to Bethel. Now there was an old prophet living in Bethel, and his sons came to tell him all that the man of God had done in Bethel that day. And the words which he had said to the king, they told these to their father too. Which road did he take? Their father asked. His sons showed him the road which the man of God who came from Judah had taken. Saddle the donkey for me, he said to his sons. They saddled the donkey for him and he mounted. He followed the man of God and found him sitting under a terebinth. Are you the man of God, he said, who came from Judah? I am, he replied. Come home with me, he said, and take some food. I cannot go back with you, he answered, or eat or drink anything here, for I have received Yahweh's order. You are to eat or drink nothing there, nor to return by the way you came. I too am a prophet like you, the other replied, and an angel told me this by Yahweh's command. Bring him back with you to your house to eat and drink." He was lying to him. The man of God went back with him. He ate and drank at his house. As they were sitting at table, a word of Yahweh came to the prophet who had brought him back, and he addressed the man of God who came from Judah. "Yahweh says this," he said. "Since you have defied Yahweh's command and not obeyed the orders which Yahweh your God gave you, but have come back and eaten and drunk where he forbade you to eat and drink, your corpse will never reach the tomb of your ancestors." After he had eaten and drunk, the prophet saddled the donkey for him, and he turned about and went away. A lion met him on the road and killed him. His corpse lay stretched out on the road. The donkey stood there beside it. The lion stood by the corpse too. People going by saw the corpse lying on the road and the lion standing by the corpse, and went and spoke about it in the town where the old prophet lived. When the prophet who had made the man turn back heard about it, he said, "That is the man of God who defied Yahweh's command. Yahweh has handed him over to the lion, which has mauled and killed him, just as Yahweh had foretold it would." He said to his sons, "Saddle the donkey for me," and they saddled it. He set off and found the man's corpse lying on the road with the donkey and the lion standing beside the corpse. The lion had neither eaten the corpse nor mauled the donkey. The prophet lifted the corpse of the man of God and put it on the donkey and brought it back to the town where he lived to hold mourning for him and bury him. He laid the corpse in his own tomb, and they raised the mourning cry for him, "Alas, my brother!" After burying him, the prophet said to his sons, "When I die, bury me in the same tomb as the man of God, lay my bones beside his." For the word he uttered at Yahweh's command against the altar of Bethel and against all the shrines of the high places in the towns of Samaria will certainly come true. Jeroboam did not give up his wicked ways after this incident, but went on appointing priests for the high places from the common people. He consecrated as priests of the high places any who wished to be. Such conduct made the house of Jeroboam a sinful house, and caused its ruin and extinction from the face of the earth. 1 Kings, chapter 14. At that time Abijah, Jeroboam's son, fell sick, and Jeroboam said to his wife, "Come, please disguise yourself so that no one will recognize you as Jeroboam's wife, and go to Shiloh. The prophet Ahijah is there, the man who said I was to be king of this people. Go to him, and take 10 loaves and some savory food and a jar of honey. He will tell you what will happen to the child." Jeroboam's wife did this. She set out, went to Shiloh and came to Ahijah's house. Now Ahijah could not see, his eyes were fixed with age. But Yahweh had told him, "Jeroboam's wife is now on her way to ask you for a prophecy about her son, as he is sick. You will tell her such and such. When she comes, she will pretend to be some other woman." So when Ahijah heard her footsteps at the door, he called, "Come in, wife of Jeroboam. Why pretend to be someone else? I have bad news for you. Go and tell Jeroboam, Yahweh, God of Israel, says this, I raised you from the people and made you leader of my people Israel. I tore the kingdom from the house of David and gave it to you. But you have not been like my servant David, who kept my commandments and followed me with all his heart, doing only what I regard as right. You have done more evil than all your predecessors. You have gone and made yourself other gods, idols of cast metal, provoking my anger, and you have turned your back on me. For this I shall bring disaster on the house of Jeroboam. I shall wipe out every manjack of the family of Jeroboam, fettered or free in Israel. I shall sweep away the house of Jeroboam as a man sweeps dung away till none is left. Those of Jeroboam's family who die in the city, the dogs will eat, and those who die in the open country, the birds of the air will eat, for Yahweh has spoken. Now get up and go home. At the moment your feet enter the town, the child will die. All Israel will mourn for him and bury him, and he alone of Jeroboam's family will have a proper burial. For in him alone of the house of Jeroboam can Yahweh, God of Israel, find anything good. Yahweh will set a king over Israel, who will put an end to the house of Jeroboam. Yahweh will make Israel shake, till it quivers like a reed in the water. He will uproot Israel from this prosperous land which he gave to their ancestors and scatter them beyond the river for provoking Yahweh to anger by making their sacred poles. He will abandon Israel for the sins which Jeroboam has committed and made Israel commit. Jeroboam's wife rose and left. She arrived at Tirzah, and when she crossed the threshold of the palace, the child was already dead. They buried him, and all Israel mourned for him, just as Yahweh had foretold through his servant Ahijah the prophet. The rest of the history of Jeroboam, what wars he waged, how he governed, this is recorded in the book of the Annals of the Kings of Israel. Jeroboam's reign lasted 22 years. Then he fell asleep with his ancestors. His son Nadab succeeded him. In Judah, Rehoboam son of Solomon became king. He was 41 years old when he came to the throne, and he reigned for 17 years in Jerusalem, the city which Yahweh had chosen out of all the tribes of Israel, to give his name a home there. His mother's name was Naamah, the Ammonite. He did what is displeasing to Yahweh, arousing his resentment more than his ancestors by all the sins which they had committed. They had built themselves high places, and had set up pillars and sacred poles on every high hill and under every spreading tree. There were even male sacred prostitutes in the country. He copied all the shameful practices of the nations whom Yahweh had dispossessed for the Israelites. And so it happened that in the 5th year of King Rehoboam, Shishak king of Egypt advanced on Jerusalem and carried off all the treasures of the temple of Yahweh and the treasures of the royal palace. He took everything away, including all the golden shields which Solomon had made. To replace those, King Rehoboam made bronze shields, entrusting them to the commanders of the guard who guarded the king's palace gate. Whenever the king went to the temple of Yahweh, the guards would carry them, returning them to the guardroom afterwards. The rest of the history of Rehoboam, his entire career, is this not recorded in the book of the Annals of the Kings of Judah? Warfare between Rehoboam and Jeroboam went on throughout the period. When Rehoboam fell asleep with his ancestors, he was buried in the city of David. His son Abijam succeeded him. 1 Kings, chapter 15. In the 18th year of King Jeroboam son of Nebat, Abijam became king of Judah and reigned for 3 years in Jerusalem. His mother's name was Maacah, descendant of Absalom. In everything he followed the sinful example of his father before him. His heart was not wholly with Yahweh his God, as the heart of David his ancestor had been. However, for David's sake, Yahweh his God gave him a lamp in Jerusalem, with a son to succeed him, so keeping Jerusalem secure. For David had done what Yahweh regarded as right and had never in all his life disobeyed whatever he commanded him, except in the matter of Uriah the Hittite. The rest of the history of Abijam, his entire career, is this not recorded in the book of the Annals of the Kings of Judah? Abijam and Jeroboam made war on each other. When Abijam fell asleep with his ancestors, he was buried in the city of David. His son Asa succeeded him. In the 20th year of Jeroboam king of Israel, Asa became king of Judah and reigned for 41 years in Jerusalem. His mother's name was Maacah, descendant of Absalom. Asa did what Yahweh regards as right, as his ancestor David had done. He drove the male prostitutes out of the country and got rid of all the idols which his ancestors had made. He even deprived his grandmother Maacah of the dignity of great lady for having made an obscenity for Asherah. Asa cut down her obscenity and burnt it in the ravine of the Kidron. Though the high places were not abolished, Asa's heart was loyal to Yahweh throughout his life. He deposited his father's and his own dedicated gifts of silver, gold and sacred vessels in the temple of Yahweh. Asa and Baasha king of Israel were at war with each other throughout their reigns. Baasha king of Israel marched on Judah and fortified Ramah to blockade Asa king of Judah. Asa then took all the remaining silver and gold left in the treasuries of the temple of Yahweh and the royal palace. Entrusting this to his servants, King Asa sent them with the following message to Ben-Hadad son of Taberman, son of Hezion, the king of Aram who lived in Damascus. Let us make an alliance between myself and yourself, between my father and your father. Look, I have sent you a gift of silver and gold. Come, break off your alliance with Baasha king of Israel, which will make him withdraw from me." Ben-Hadad listened favorably to King Asa, and sent the generals of his armies to attack the towns of Israel. He ravaged Ijon, Dan, Abel-Beth-Maachah, all Chinneroth, and the whole territory of Naphtali. When Baasha heard this, he gave up fortifying Ramah and retired to Tirzah. King Asa then summoned all Judah. No one was exempt. They took away the stones and timber with which Baasha had been fortifying Ramah, and King Asa used them to fortify Geba of Benjamin and Mizpah. The rest of the history of Asa, all his valor, his entire career, is this not recorded in the book of the annals of the kings of Judah? In his old age, however, he contracted a disease of his feet. When Asa fell asleep with his ancestors, he was buried with his ancestors in the city of his ancestor David. His son Jehoshaphat succeeded him. Nadab son of Jeroboam became king of Israel in the 2nd year of Asa king of Judah, and he reigned over Israel for 2 years. He did what is displeasing to Yahweh. He copied his father's example and the sin into which he had led Israel. Baasha son of Ahijah, of the house of Issachar, plotted against him and murdered him at Gibbethon, a Philistine town which Nadab and all Israel were besieging. Baasha killed Nadab and succeeded him in the 3rd year of Asa king of Judah. No sooner was he king than he butchered the entire house of Jeroboam, not sparing a soul, and put an end to it, just as Yahweh had foretold through his servant Ahijah of Shiloh, because of the sins which he had committed and into which he had led Israel, and because he had provoked the anger of Yahweh, God of Israel. The rest of the history of Nadab, his entire career, is this not recorded in the book of the annals of the kings of Israel? In the 3rd year of Asa king of Judah, Baasha son of Ahijah became king of Israel at Tirzah for 24 years. He did what is displeasing to Yahweh. He copied the example of Jeroboam and the sin into which he had led Israel. 1 Kings, chapter 16. The word of Yahweh came to Jehu son of Hanani against Baasha. I raised you from the dust and made you leader of my people Israel, but you have followed Jeroboam's example and led my people Israel into sins which provoke my anger. Now I shall sweep away Baasha and his house. I shall make your house like the house of Jeroboam son of Nebat. Those of Baasha's family who die in the city, the dogs will eat, and those who die in the open country, the birds of the air will eat. The rest of the history of Baasha, his career, his valor, is this not recorded in the book of the annals of the kings of Israel? When Baasha fell asleep with his ancestors, he was buried in Tirzah. His son Elah succeeded him. Furthermore, the word of Yahweh was delivered through the prophet Jehu son of Hanani against Baasha and his house, first because of the many ways in which he had displeased Yahweh, provoking him to anger by his actions and becoming like the house of Jeroboam. Secondly, because he had destroyed that house. In the 26th year of Asa king of Judah, Elah son of Baasha became king of Israel at Tirzah for 2 years. Zimri, one of his officers, captain of half his chariotry, plotted against him. While he was at Tirzah, drinking himself senseless in the house of Arza, who was master of the palace in Tirzah, Zimri came in, struck him down and killed him in the 27th year of Asa king of Judah, and succeeded him. On his accession, as soon as he was seated on the throne, he butchered Baasha's entire family, not leaving him one manjack of them alive, neither relative nor friend. Zimri destroyed the whole house of Baasha, in accordance with the word which Yahweh had spoken against Baasha through the prophet Jehu, because of all the sins of Baasha and his son Elah into which they had led Israel, provoking the anger of Yahweh, God of Israel, with their worthless idols. The history of Elah, his entire career, is this not recorded in the book of the annals of the kings of Israel? In the 27th year of Asa king of Judah, Zimri became king for 7 days, at Tirzah. The people were then encamped in front of Gibbethon, a Philistine town. When news reached the camp of how Zimri had not only plotted against but actually killed the king, all Israel proclaimed the army commander Omri as king of Israel in the camp that very day. Omri, and all Israel with him, raised the siege of Gibbethon and laid siege to Tirzah. When Zimri saw that the town had been captured, he went into the keep of the royal palace, burned the palace over his own head, and died. This was because of the sin which he had committed in doing what is displeasing to Yahweh, by copying the example of Jeroboam and the sin into which he had led Israel. The rest of the history of Zimri and of his conspiracy, is this not recorded in the book of the annals of the kings of Israel? The people of Israel then split into two factions, one half following Tibni son of Ginnath to make him king, the other half following Omri. But the faction of Omri proved stronger than that of Tibni son of Ginnath. Thus Tibni lost his life and Omri became king. In the 31st year of Asa king of Judah, Omri became king of Israel and reigned for 12 years. He reigned for 6 years at Tirzah. Then for 2 talents of silver he bought the hill of Samaria from Shemer and on it built a town which he named Samaria after Shemer who had owned the hill. Omri did what is displeasing to Yahweh, and was worse than all his predecessors. In every way he copied the example of Jeroboam son of Nebat and the sins into which he had led Israel, provoking the anger of Yahweh, God of Israel, with their worthless idols. The rest of the history of Omri, his career, his valor, is this not recorded in the book of the annals of the kings of Israel? When Omri fell asleep with his ancestors, he was buried in Samaria. His son Ahab succeeded him. Ahab son of Omri became king of Israel in the 38th year of Asa king of Judah, and reigned over Israel for 22 years in Samaria. Ahab son of Omri did what is displeasing to Yahweh, and was worse than all his predecessors. The least that he did was to follow the sinful example of Jeroboam son of Nebat. He married Jezebel daughter of Ethbaal, king of the Sidonians, and then proceeded to serve Baal and worship him. He erected an altar to him in the temple of Baal which he built in Samaria. Ahab also put up a sacred pole and committed other crimes as well, provoking the anger of Yahweh, God of Israel, more than all the kings of Israel his predecessors. It was in his time that Heel of Bethel rebuilt Jericho. Laying its foundations cost him his eldest son Abram, and erecting its gates cost him his youngest son Segub, just as Yahweh had foretold through Joshua son of Nun. 1 Kings, chapter 17. Elijah the Tishbite, of Tishbe in Gilead, said to Ahab, "By the life of Yahweh, God of Israel, whom I serve, there will be neither dew nor rain these coming years unless I give the word." The word of Yahweh came to him, "Go away from here, go east and hide by the torrent of Cherith, east of the Jordan. You can drink from the stream, and I have ordered the ravens to bring you food there." So he set out and did as Yahweh had said. He went and stayed by the torrent of Cherith, east of the Jordan. The ravens brought him bread in the morning and meat in the evening, and he quenched his thirst at the stream. But after a while the stream dried up, for the country had had no rain. And then the word of Yahweh came to him, "Up and go to Zarephath in Sidonia, and stay there. I have ordered a widow there to give you food." So he went off to Sidon. And when he reached the city gate, there was a widow gathering sticks. Addressing her he said, "Please bring a little water in a pitcher for me to drink." She was on her way to fetch it when he called after her. "Please," he said, "bring me a scrap of bread in your hand." "As Yahweh your God lives," she replied, "I have no baked bread, but only a handful of meal in a jar and a little oil in a jug. I am just gathering a stick or two to go and prepare this for myself and my son to eat, and then we shall die." But Elijah said to her, "Do not be afraid. Go and do as you have said. But first make a little scone of it for me and bring it to me, and then make some for yourself and for your son. For Yahweh, God of Israel, says this, Jar of meal shall not be spent, jug of oil shall not be emptied, before the day when Yahweh sends rain on the face of the earth." The woman went and did as Elijah told her, and they ate the food, she, himself, and her son. The jar of meal was not spent nor the jug of oil emptied, just as Yahweh had foretold through Elijah. It happened after this that the son of the mistress of the house fell sick. His illness was so severe that in the end he expired. And the woman said to Elijah, "What quarrel have you with me, man of God? Have you come here to bring my sins home to me and to kill my son? Give me your son, he said, and, taking him from her lap, he carried him to the upper room where he was staying and laid him on his bed. He cried out to Yahweh, Yahweh my God, by killing her son do you mean to bring grief even to the widow who is looking after me? He stretched himself on the child 3 times and cried out to Yahweh, Yahweh my God, may the soul of this child, I beg you, come into him again. Yahweh heard Elijah's prayer, and the child's soul came back into his body, and he revived. Elijah took the child, brought him down from the upper room into the house, and gave him to his mother. Look, Elijah said, your son is alive. And the woman replied, Now I know you are a man of God, and the word of Yahweh in your mouth is truth itself. First Kings, chapter 18. A long time went by, and the word of Yahweh came to Elijah in the 3rd year. Go, present yourself to Ahab, and I will send rain on the country. So Elijah set off to present himself to Ahab. As the famine was particularly severe in Samaria, Ahab summoned Obadiah, the master of the palace. Obadiah held Yahweh in great reverence. When Jezebel was butchering the prophets of Yahweh, Obadiah took 100 of them and hid them, 50 at a time, in a cave, and kept them provided with food and water. And Ahab said to Obadiah, Come along, we must scour the country, all the springs and all the ravines, in the hope of finding grass to keep horses and mules alive, or we shall have to slaughter some of our stock. They divided the country for the purpose of their survey. Ahab went one way by himself, and Obadiah went another way by himself. While Obadiah was on his way, whom should he meet but Elijah? Recognizing him, he fell on his face and said, So it is you, my lord Elijah. Yes, he replied. Go and tell your master, Elijah is here. But Obadiah said, What sin I have committed, for you to put your servant into Ahab's power and cause my death? As Yahweh your God lives, there is no nation or kingdom where my master has not sent in search of you. And when they said, He is not there, he made the kingdom or nation swear an oath that they did not know where you were. And now you say to me, Go and tell your master, Elijah is here. But as soon as I leave you, the Spirit of Yahweh will carry you away, and I shall not know where. I shall go and tell Ahab. He will not be able to find you, and then he will kill me. Yet from his youth your servant has revered Yahweh. Has no one told my lord what I did when Jezebel butchered the prophets of Yahweh, how I hid 100 of them in a cave, 50 at a time, and kept them provided with food and water? And now you say to me, Go and tell your master, Elijah is here. Why, he will kill me. Elijah replied, As Yahweh Sabaoth lives, whom I serve, I shall present myself to him today. Obadiah went to find Ahab and tell him the news. And Ahab then went to find Elijah. When he saw Elijah, Ahab said, So there you are, you scourge of Israel. Not I, he replied. I am not the scourge of Israel. You and your family are, because you have deserted Yahweh and followed Baal. Now give orders for all Israel to gather round me on Mount Carmel, and also the 400 prophets of Baal who eat at Jezebel's table. Ahab called all Israel together and assembled the prophets on Mount Carmel. Elijah stepped out in front of all the people. How long, he said, do you mean to hobble first on one leg then on the other? If Yahweh is God, follow him. If Baal, follow him. But the people had nothing to say. Elijah then said to them, I alone, am left as a prophet of Yahweh, while the prophets of Baal are 450. Let 2 bulls be given us. Let them choose one for themselves, dismember it but not set fire to it. I in my turn shall prepare the other bull, but not set fire to it. You must call on the name of your God, and I shall call on the name of Yahweh. The God who answers with fire is God indeed. The people all answered, agreed. Elijah then said to the prophets of Baal, Choose 1 bull and begin, for there are more of you. Call on the name of your God, but light no fire. They took the bull and prepared it. And from morning to midday they called on the name of Baal. "O Baal, answer us," they cried. But there was no voice, no answer, as they performed their hobbling dance round the altar which they had made. Midday came, and Elijah mocked them. "Call louder," he said, "for he is a god. He is preoccupied, or he is busy, or he has gone on a journey. Perhaps he is asleep and needs to be woken up." So they shouted louder and gashed themselves, as their custom was, with swords and spears until the blood flowed down them. Midday passed, and they ranted on until the time when the offering is presented. But there was no voice, no answer, no sign of attention. Then Elijah said to all the people, "Come over to me." And all the people came over to him. He repaired Yahweh's altar which had been torn down. Elijah took 12 stones, corresponding to the number of tribes of the sons of Jacob, to whom the word of Yahweh had come, "Israel is to be your name," and built an altar in the name of Yahweh. Round the altar he dug a trench of a size to hold 2 measures of seed. He then arranged the wood, dismembered the bull, and laid it on the wood. Then he said, "Fill 4 jars with water and pour it on the burnt offering and on the wood." They did this. He said, "Do it a second time." They did it a second time. He said, "Do it a third time." They did it a third time. The water flowed round the altar until even the trench itself was full of water. At the time when the offering is presented, Elijah the prophet stepped forward. "Yahweh, God of Abraham, Isaac, and Israel," he said, "let them know today that you are God in Israel, and that I am your servant, that I have done all these things at your command. Answer me, Yahweh, answer me, so that this people may know that you, Yahweh, are God and are winning back their hearts." Then Yahweh's fire fell and consumed the burnt offering and the wood and licked up the water in the trench. When all the people saw this, they fell on their faces. "Yahweh is God," they cried, "Yahweh is God." Elijah said, "Seize the prophets of Baal. Do not let one of them escape." They seized them, and Elijah took them down to the Kishon, and there he slaughtered them. Elijah said to Ahab, "Go back now, eat and drink, for I hear the approaching sound of rain." While Ahab went back to eat and drink, Elijah climbed to the top of Carmel and bowed down to the ground, putting his face between his knees. "Now go up," he told his servant, "and look out to sea." He went up and looked. "There is nothing at all," he said. 7 times Elijah told him to go back. The 7th time the servant said, "Now there is a cloud, small as a man's hand, rising from the sea." Elijah said, "Go and say to Ahab, harness the chariot and go down before the rain stops you." And with that the sky grew dark with cloud and storm, and rain fell in torrents. Ahab mounted his chariot and made for Jezreel. But the hand of Yahweh had come on Elijah, and, hitching up his clothes, he ran ahead of Ahab all the way to Jezreel. 1 Kings, chapter 19. When Ahab told Jezebel everything that Elijah had done, and how he had put all the prophets to the sword, Jezebel sent a messenger to Elijah to say, "May the gods bring unnameable ills on me and worse ills too, if by this time tomorrow I have not made your life like one of theirs." He was afraid and fled for his life. He came to Beersheba, a town of Judah, where he left his servant. He himself went on into the desert, a day's journey, and sitting under a furze bush wished he were dead. "Yahweh," he said, "I have had enough. Take my life. I am no better than my ancestors." Then he lay down and went to sleep. Then all of a sudden an angel touched him and said, "Get up and eat." He looked round, and there at his head was a scone baked on hot stones, and a jar of water. He ate and drank and then lay down again. But the angel of Yahweh came back a second time and touched him and said, "Get up and eat, or the journey will be too long for you." So he got up and ate and drank, and strengthened by that food he walked for 40 days and 40 nights until he reached Horeb, God's mountain. There he went into a cave and spent the night there. Then the word of Yahweh came to him saying, "What are you doing here, Elijah?" He replied, "I am full of jealous zeal for Yahweh Sabaoth, because the Israelites have abandoned your covenant, have torn down your altars and put your prophets to the sword. I am the only one left, and now they want to kill me." Then he was told, "Go out and stand on the mountain before Yahweh," for at that moment Yahweh was going by. A mighty hurricane split the mountains and shattered the rocks before Yahweh. But Yahweh was not in the hurricane. And after the hurricane, an earthquake. But Yahweh was not in the earthquake. And after the earthquake, fire. But Yahweh was not in the fire. And after the fire, a light murmuring sound. And when Elijah heard this, he covered his face with his cloak and went out and stood at the entrance of the cave. Then a voice came to him, which said, "What are you doing here, Elijah?" He replied, "I am full of jealous zeal for Yahweh, God Sabaoth, because the Israelites have abandoned your covenant, have torn down your altars and put your prophets to the sword. I am the only one left, and now they want to kill me." "Go," Yahweh said, "go back by the same way to the desert of Damascus. You must go and anoint Hazael as king of Aram. You must anoint Jehu son of Nimshi as king of Israel, and anoint Elisha son of Shaphat, of Abel-Meholah, as prophet to succeed you. Anyone who escapes the sword of Hazael will be put to death by Jehu, and anyone who escapes the sword of Jehu will be put to death by Elisha. But I shall spare 7,000 in Israel, all the knees that have not bent before Baal, all the mouths that have not kissed him." Leaving there, he came on Elisha son of Shaphat as he was plowing behind 12 yoke of oxen, he himself being with the 12th. Elijah passed near to him and threw his cloak over him. Elisha left his oxen and ran after Elijah. "Let me kiss my father and mother, then I will follow you," he said. Elijah answered, Go back. For have I done anything to you?" Elisha turned away, took a yoke of oxen and slaughtered them. He used the oxen's tackle for cooking the meat, which he gave the people to eat. He then rose and, following Elijah, became his servant. First Kings, chapter 20. Ben-Hadad king of Aram mustered his whole army. 32 kings were with him, and horses and chariots, and marched on Samaria, to besiege it and take it by assault. He sent messengers into the city to Ahab king of Israel to tell him, "Ben-Hadad says this, your silver and gold are mine. Your wives and children remain yours." The king of Israel replied, "As you command, my lord king. Myself and all I have are yours." The messengers came again. This time they said, "Ben-Hadad says this, I have already sent you in order to hand over your silver and your gold, your wives and your children. But I swear, this time tomorrow, I shall send my servants to ransack your house and your servants' houses and lay hands on everything that they value and take it away." The king of Israel summoned all the elders of the country and said, "You can see clearly how this man intends to ruin us. He has already demanded my wives and my children, although I have not refused him my silver and gold." All the elders and all the people said, "Take no notice. Do not consent." So he gave this answer to Ben-Hadad's messengers, "Say to my lord the king, all you first required of your servant I will do, but this I cannot do." And the messengers went back with the answer. Ben-Hadad then sent him the following message, "May the gods bring unnameable ills on me and worse ills too, if there is enough dust in Samaria for each of my followers to have a handful." But the king of Israel returned this answer, "Say, the man who puts on his armor is not the one to boast, but the man who takes it off." When Ben-Hadad heard this message, he was under the awnings drinking with the kings. He gave orders to his servants, "Take up position." And they took up their positions against the city. A prophet then arrived, looking for Ahab king of Israel. "Yahweh says this," he said, "You have seen this huge army? This very day I shall deliver it into your hands, and you will know that I am Yahweh." "By whose means?" Ahab asked. The prophet replied, "Yahweh says this, by means of the guards of the district governors. Who will coordinate the attack? Ahab asked. You will, the prophet replied. So Ahab inspected the guards of the district governors. There were 232. After these he reviewed the army, all the Israelites. There were 7,000. They made a sortie at midday, when Ben-Hadad was drinking himself senseless under the awnings, he and the 32 kings who were allies. The guards of the district governors led the sortie. A report was made to Ben-Hadad. Some men have come out of Samaria. He said, if they have come out for peace, take them alive. If they have come out for war, take them alive too. So they made a sortie from the city, the district governor's guards and behind them the army, and each struck down his man. Aram took to flight and Israel pursued. Ben-Hadad king of Aram escaped on horseback. The king of Israel then advanced, capturing horses and chariots and inflicting a great defeat on Aram. The prophet then went to the king of Israel and said, Now is the time to be resolute and think carefully about what you should do, for at the turn of the year the king of Aram will march against you. The servants of the king of Aram said to him, Their gods are gods of the mountains. That is why they have proved stronger than we are. But if we fight them on level ground, we shall certainly beat them. This is what you must do. Remove all these kings from their commands and appoint professional soldiers in their place. You, for your part, must recruit an army as large as the one which deserted you, with as many horses and as many chariots. Then if we fight them on level ground, we shall certainly beat them. He listened to their advice and acted accordingly. At the turn of the year, Ben-Hadad mustered the Arameans and marched on Aphek to fight Israel. The Israelites were already mobilized and provisioned, and marched out to meet them. Encamped opposite them, the Israelites looked like 2 herds of goats, whereas the Arameans filled the countryside. The man of God then went to the king of Israel and said, Yahweh says this, Since Aram has said that Yahweh is a god of the mountains and not a god of the plains, I shall put the whole of this huge army into your power, and you will know that I am Yahweh. For 7 days they were encamped opposite each other. On the 7th day battle was joined, and the Israelites slaughtered the Arameans, 100,000 foot soldiers in 1 day. The rest fled to Aphek, into the citadel, but the city walls collapsed on 27,000 of the survivors. Now Ben-Hadad had fled and taken refuge in an inner room inside the citadel. Look, his servant said to him, we have heard that the kings of Israel are faithful and kind kings. Let us put sackcloth round our waists and cords round our heads and go out to the king of Israel. Perhaps he will spare your life. So they wrapped sackcloth round their waists and put cords round their heads and went to the king of Israel, and said, Your servant Ben-Hadad says, Spare my life. So he is still alive, he replied. He is my brother. The men took this for a good omen and quickly seized on his words. Yes, they said, Ben-Hadad is your brother. Ahab said, Go and fetch him. Then Ben-Hadad came out to him, and Ahab made him get up into his chariot. Ben-Hadad said, I shall restore the towns which my father took from your father, and you may set up a trading quarter for yourself in Damascus as my father did in Samaria. With a treaty, Ahab said, I shall set you free. Granting him a treaty, Ahab let him go. At Yahweh's command, a member of the Brotherhood of Prophets said to a companion of his, Strike me. But the man refused to strike him. So he said to him, Since you have disobeyed Yahweh's order, the very moment you leave me a lion will kill you. And no sooner had he left him than he met a lion, which killed him. The prophet then went to find another man and said, Strike me. And the man struck him and wounded him. The prophet then went and stood waiting for the king on the road, disguising himself with a bandage over his eyes. As the king passed, he called out to him, Your servant was making his way to where the fight was thickest when someone left the fighting to bring a man to me, and said, Guard this man. If he is found missing, your life will pay for his, or else you will have to pay 1 talent of silver. But your servant was busy with one thing and another. The man disappeared. The king of Israel said, That is your sentence then. You have pronounced it yourself. At this the man quickly pulled off the bandage over his eyes, and the king of Israel recognized him as one of the prophets. He said to the king, "Yahweh says this, since you have let the man escape who was under my curse of destruction, your life will pay for his, your people for his people." And the king of Israel went home, gloomy and out of temper, back to Samaria. First Kings, chapter 21. This is what happened next. Naboth of Jezreel had a vineyard close by the palace of Ahab king of Samaria, and Ahab said to Naboth, "Give me your vineyard to be my vegetable garden, since it adjoins my palace. I will give you a better vineyard for it, or, if you prefer, I will give you its value in money." Naboth, however, said to Ahab, "Yahweh forbid that I should give you my ancestral heritage." Ahab went home gloomy and out of temper at the words of Naboth of Jezreel, "I will not give you my heritage for my ancestors." He lay down on his bed and turned his face away and refused to eat. His wife Jezebel came to him. "Why are you so dispirited," she said, "that you refuse to eat?" He said, "I have been talking to Naboth of Jezreel. I said, 'Give me your vineyard either for money or, if you prefer, for another vineyard in exchange.' But he said, 'I will not give you my vineyard.' Then his wife Jezebel said, 'Some king of Israel you make. Get up, eat and take heart. I myself shall get you the vineyard of Naboth the Jezreelite.' So she wrote a letter in Ahab's name and sealed it with his seal, sending the letter to the elders and notables of the city where Naboth lived. In the letter she wrote, 'Proclaim a fast, and put Naboth in a prominent place among the people. There confront him with a couple of scoundrels who will accuse him as follows: You have cursed God and the king. Then take him outside and stone him to death.' The men of Naboth's city, the elders and notables living in his city, did what Jezebel ordered, as was written in the letter which she had sent him. They proclaimed a fast and put Naboth in a prominent place among the people. The two scoundrels then came and confronted him, and the scoundrels then publicly accused Naboth as follows: Naboth has cursed God and the king. He was then taken outside the city and stoned to death. They then sent word to Jezebel, Naboth has been stoned to death. When Jezebel heard that Naboth had been stoned to death, she said to Ahab, Get up, take possession of the vineyard which Naboth of Jezreel refused to sell you, for Naboth is no longer alive, he is dead. When Ahab heard that Naboth was dead, he got up to go down to the vineyard of Naboth of Jezreel and take possession of it. Then the word of Yahweh came to Elijah the Tishbite, Up, go down to meet Ahab king of Israel, in Samaria. You will find him in Naboth's vineyard. He has gone down to take possession of it. You are to say this to him, Yahweh says this, You have committed murder and now you usurp as well. For this, and Yahweh says this, in the place where the dogs lick the blood of Naboth, the dogs will lick your blood too. Ahab said to Elijah, So you have caught me, O my enemy. Elijah answered, I have caught you, for your double dealing, and since you have done what is displeasing to Yahweh, I shall now bring disaster down on you. I shall sweep away your descendants and wipe out every manjack of the house of Ahab, fettered or free in Israel. I shall treat your house as I treated the house of Jeroboam son of Nebat and of Baasha son of Ahijah, for provoking my anger and leading Israel into sin. Against Jezebel too Yahweh spoke these words, The dogs will eat Jezebel in the field of Jezreel. Those of Ahab's family who die in the city, the dogs will eat, and those who die in the open country, the birds of the air will eat. And indeed there never was anyone like Ahab for double dealing and for doing what is displeasing to Yahweh, urged on by Jezebel his wife. He behaved in the most abominable way, adhering to idols, just as the Amorites had, whom Yahweh had dispossessed for the Israelites. When Ahab heard these words, he tore his garments and put sackcloth next to his skin and fasted. He slept in the sackcloth, he walked with slow steps. Then the word of Yahweh came to Elijah the Tishbite, Have you seen how Ahab has humbled himself before me? Since he has humbled himself before me, I shall not bring the disaster in his days. I shall bring the disaster down on his house in his son's days. First Kings, chapter 22. There was a lull of 3 years, with no fighting between Aram and Israel. Then, in the 3rd year, Jehoshaphat king of Judah paid a visit to the king of Israel. The king of Israel said to his officers, "You are aware that Ramoth in Gilead belongs to us? And yet we do nothing to wrest it away from the king of Aram." He said to Jehoshaphat, "Will you come with me to attack Ramoth in Gilead?" Jehoshaphat replied to the king of Israel, "I will be as you, my men as yours, my horses as yours." Jehoshaphat, however, said to the king of Israel, "First, please inquire what the word of Yahweh is." The king of Israel then called the prophets together, about 400 of them. "Should I go and attack Ramoth in Gilead," he asked, "or should I hold back?" "Go ahead," they replied, "for Yahweh has already given it to the king." Jehoshaphat, however, said, "Is there no other prophet of Yahweh here, so that we can inquire through him?" The king of Israel said to Jehoshaphat, "There is one more man through whom we can consult Yahweh, but I hate him because he never has a favorable prophecy for me, only unfavorable ones. He is Micaiah son of Imlah." "I hope the king's words are unjustified," said Jehoshaphat. The king of Israel then summoned a court official and said, "Bring Micaiah son of Imlah immediately." The king of Israel and Jehoshaphat king of Judah were sitting each on his throne, wearing their robes, in an open space just outside the gate of Samaria, with all the prophets in a state of ecstasy before them. Zedekiah son of Kenana, who had made himself some iron horns, said, "Yahweh says, with horns like these you will gore the Arameans till you make an end of them." And all the prophets cried ecstatically in the same vein, saying, "March on Ramoth in Gilead. Success is sure, for Yahweh has already given it to the king." The messenger who had gone to summon Micaiah said to him, "Look here, what the prophets are saying is uniformly favorable to the king. I hope you will say the same as they do and speak favorably." Micaiah said, "As Yahweh lives, I shall speak as Yahweh tells me." When he came to the king said, "Micaiah, should we go and attack Ramoth in Gilead, or should we hold back?" He replied, "Go ahead. Success is sure, for Yahweh has already given it to the king." The king then said, "How often must I put you on oath to tell me nothing but the truth in the name of Yahweh?" Then he spoke out, "I saw all Israel scattered on the mountains like sheep without a shepherd. And Yahweh said, 'These have no master, let them all go safely home.'" At this the king of Israel said to Jehoshaphat, "Did I not tell you that he never gives me favorable prophecies, but only unfavorable ones?" Micaiah went on, "Now listen to the word of Yahweh. I saw Yahweh seated on his throne with the whole array of heaven standing by him, on his right and on his left. Yahweh said, 'Who will entice Ahab into marching to his death at Ramoth in Gilead?' At which some answered one way, and some another. A spirit then came forward and stood before Yahweh and said, 'I will entice him.'" "How?" Yahweh asked. He replied, "I shall go and be a deceptive spirit in the mouths of all his prophets." Yahweh said, "You will succeed in enticing him. Go and do it." And now, you see, Yahweh has put a deceptive spirit into the mouths of all your prophets here. For in fact Yahweh has pronounced disaster on you. Zedekiah son of Chenaanah then came up, struck Micaiah on the cheek and said, "Which way did Yahweh's spirit leave me, to speak to you?" "That is what you will find out," Micaiah retorted, "the day you go from room to room, trying to hide." The king of Israel said, "Seize Micaiah and hand him over to Amon, governor of the city, and Joash, the king's son, and say, 'These are the king's orders. Put this man in prison and feed him on nothing but bread and water until I am safely home.'" Micaiah said, "If you ever do get home safely, Yahweh has not spoken through me." The king of Israel and Jehoshaphat king of Judah marched on Ramoth in Gilead. The king of Israel said to Jehoshaphat, I shall disguise myself to go into battle, but you put on your robes. So the king of Israel disguised himself and went into battle. Now, the king of Aram had given his chariot commanders the following order: do not attack anyone of whatever rank, except the king of Israel. So, when the chariot commanders saw Jehoshaphat, they thought, that is obviously the king of Israel, and surrounded him to attack. But when Jehoshaphat shouted his war cry, the chariot commanders, realizing that he was not the king of Israel, broke off their pursuit. Someone, however, drawing his bow without any special aim, shot the king of Israel between the joints of his armor. Turn about, said the king to his charioteer. Get me out of the fighting. I am collapsing. But the battle grew fiercer as the day went on, and the king had to be held upright in his chariot facing the Arameans, the blood from the wound running into the bottom of the chariot, until in the evening he died. At sundown a shout ran through the ranks, every man back to his town, every man back to his country. The king is dead. He was taken to Samaria, and in Samaria the king was buried. They washed the chariot at the pool of Samaria. The dogs licked up the blood, and the prostitutes washed in it, in accordance with the word which Yahweh had spoken. The rest of the history of Ahab, his entire career, the ivory house he erected, all the towns he built, is this not recorded in the book of the annals of the kings of Israel? When Ahab fell asleep with his ancestors, his son Ahaziah succeeded him. Jehoshaphat son of Asa became king of Judah in the 4th year of Ahab king of Israel. Jehoshaphat was 35 years old when he came to the throne, and he reigned for 25 years in Jerusalem. His mother's name was Azubah daughter of Shilhi. In every way he followed the example of his father Asa undeviatingly, doing what is pleasing to Yahweh. The high places, however, were not abolished. The people still offered sacrifice and incense on the high places. Jehoshaphat was at peace with the king of Israel. The rest of the history of Jehoshaphat, the valor he showed, the wars he waged, is this not recorded in the book of the annals of the kings of Judah? The few male sacred prostitutes left over from the days of his father Asa, he expelled from the country. At the time, Edom had no king, and King Jehoshaphat built ships of Tarshish to go to Ophir for gold. But they never made the voyage, since the ships were wrecked at Ezion-Geber. Ahaziah son of Ahab then proposed to Jehoshaphat, let my men go to sea with yours. But Jehoshaphat would not agree. When Jehoshaphat fell asleep with his ancestors, he was buried in the city of his ancestor, David. His son Jehoram succeeded him. Ahaziah son of Ahab became king of Israel in Samaria in the 17th year of Jehoshaphat king of Judah, and reigned over Israel for 2 years. He did what is displeasing to Yahweh, by following the example of his father and mother, and of Jeroboam son of Nebat, who had led Israel into sin. He served Baal and worshipped him, and provoked the anger of Yahweh God of Israel, just as his father had done.